Numerous underlying factors responsible for the current state of affairs, where many said the country's democracy is under siege. Political polarization since the change of power in 2018 has grown tremendously, according to experts. For almost 2 decades, what has been demonstrated is that two political groups, when have power, try to appease their support bases by employing people from a certain region. This gives them the urge to preach hate and stoking polarization, becoming a political device used by parties to stay or propel themselves to leadership. Over the last 2 decades, Sierra Leone has undergone many institutional reforms. It appears the executive controls and influences these institutions despite the reforms. This begs the question, how do we consolidate Sierra Leone's democracy? My name is Samuel Wise-Bangura, and this is AYVN Sunday. All right, good evening and a very warm welcome to AYVN Sunday. Today we will be assessing Sierra Leone's democratic space ahead of the 2023 general elections. Here with me, I have a star-studded panel that would help me unpack the conversation for the next 2 hours. I have Mohamed Roman Soare, the country's Minister of Information and Communications. Good evening and welcome to AYVN Sunday.
Good evening, Samuel. It's quite a pleasure being here.
All right, I have Andrew Lavalier, Executive Director, Institute for Governance Reform. Andrew, good evening.
Good evening, good evening, viewers and listeners.
Mercella Samba, Executive Director, Campaign for Good Governance. Good evening.
Good evening, Samuel, and thanks for having me.
All right. It's always a pleasure having you here. Let's welcome Abdoulaye Biriti, the former presidential spokesman. Good evening and welcome.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure being in this studio after a while.
Exactly. I was just going to say it's been a while. Where have you been? All right. And you, our viewers and listeners, you can always be part of the conversation. Share with us your thoughts, ask your questions, drop them on the AYV News Facebook page. We'll find time to go through some of them. As always, ensure that you tailor your messages to the issues being discussed here. But just before we plunge into our conversations for tonight, we'd love to bring you a recap of some of the top stories in the week. So the Sierra Leone police invited the mayor of Freetown City, Yvonne Akisoya, on allegation of obstruction of police duties. But the mayor's legal team, headed by Joseph Fitzgerald Kamara, wrote the police informing them that the mayor was sick and will honor the invite tomorrow, Monday. And also just a few days after the Bank of Sierra Leone, through its governor, Professor Kelfala Kalon, announced the sales of $8 million United States dollars to commercial banks through auction. The bank has announced the next wholesale foreign exchange auction of another $8 million United States dollars on Wednesday, 5th October, as a quick fix to the exchange rate and inflation. A fire incident at Ross Road in the east end of Freetown last week destroyed a structure with about 16 households. Properties worth millions of leones and destroyed and left over 100 homeless. Now, a woman who danced naked, exposing a private part in McKinney during the August 10th riots and whose video went viral on social media has been jailed for 2 years after she pleaded guilty to a charge of indecent exposure. Now, the Director General of the National Social Security and Insurance Trust, Mohamed Fuad Dabo, said 872 healthcare workers are currently paid below the minimum wage, which is being considered underpayment. And the Transport Ministry, during the budget hearing, revealed that the lack of funding prevented them from conducting a feasibility study for the reintroduction of a national railway. And perhaps the takeaway of the highlight has to do with Sierra Leone being ranked as 135 country amongst 146 happiest countries in the world. I don't know if we're happy, but we're ranked 135. But let me quickly welcome again the panel. I'm going to start off with you, Biriti, for obvious reasons. Now, looking at Sierra Leone's democracy, with everything that has happened, in the last 2 decades, where would you put Sierra Leone's democracy if you had to paint a picture?
Thank you for that opening question. For me, our democracy has been fledgling. I say fledgling because we have gone a long way as a nation. We have seen situations whereby we have change of government in what is considered to be smooth transitions. And to me, that is big kudos for us as all Sierra Leoneans, because after we've endured a very debilitating conflict in the 90s as a result of bad governance, some of which perpetuated by people who are no longer in country. At least with the introduction of multi-party democracy in 1991, we were able to conduct elections, but the coup interrupted when the Constitution was introduced. But eventually, we were able to hold elections in 1996, which eventually provided some space because we are part and parcel of the Bintumani 1 and the Bintumani 2, whereby certain critical voices in the space, the political space, were generated so that at the end of the day, all of those who were very much averse to the holding of multi-party democracy, particularly after 1989, the fall of the Berlin Wall, there was like a democratic tsunami in the rest of sub-Saharan Africa. So I can say in Sierra Leone, we have seen some progress being made. But again, that progress, I cannot say Sierra Leone democracy is completely on the edge, but rather I can describe it to be very fledgling for very obvious reasons. And part of those reasons could be the challenges around issues around good governance, peace building, democracy, and of course the respect of human rights as enshrined in particularly Chapter 3 of Cap 6 of our 1991 Constitution. Those are the issues whereby for any government whatsoever, until you use that sacred document as your Bible in governance to make sure it is respected, that's where we can say, you know what, we are moving forward. But I can say I'm very optimistic when it comes that our country is moving forward.
We'll come to the specific principles that describe democracy. Let me hear what Mercella would have to say in terms of describing democracy at this point.
I want to take a trajectory.
Quiet.
Right? And since 1961, when we got to independence, we had a promise. For me, not development. I see democracy and development going hand in hand. If democracy cannot reflect in the lives of people, people would not value democracy. We had a fledgling country, 1961, promising society. Intermittently, there were obstructions to a democratic practice. Fast forward, 1991, we had the Civil War. Again, by 1996, which we normally refer to as our recent, renewal into democratic practice, we came to the limelight again as a country forward for the ideals. And we have, successful democratic, which is actually a pinnacle of hope to many. All of those elections that we have conducted, the post-conflict elections, have been labeled by democratic practitioners and elections observers as free and credible. But beyond elections, we need to understand the dynamics within the state. We have come a long way. Ours is a twin concept that we are building together. Our recent democracy is just about instituting contestation, instituting patterns of participation, or instituting patterns of civil liberties and rights. What we have is also in tandem with peace building. Because since it's a post-conflict democracy, we always look at making sure that, because making pass the ideals to the extent that it undermines the peace. So once we are moving into the elections for 2023, our current state of affairs, we need to be concerned not just about internal politics, but politics that's happening externally. Because all of these have impact on the way our democracy would build, in the next couple of years. Now, within the external factors, we are seeing what's happening, in the region, in West Africa, the resurgence of violent coups. We just saw in the last 2 days what happened in Burkina. I mean, this sort of situation in our external environment. We have seen, for example, in Guinea, in Togo, and in Mali, how constitutions have been tampered with to keep political leaders in power. We see in Cameroon situations where, for example, there's limitless term. Leaders are in the society and they don't want to go. We are also seeing violent extremism coming to the fore. These are things happening within the region, and we need to be concerned. So when we talk about democratic space, it is not only about the internal factors, but what are the external factors that influences the space, and we should be fully conscious of this and guard our democratic practice jealously.
So we're going to look at the practice, how we are handling that in Sierra Leone. That is definitely going to, be the crux of it all, what we're doing. So let me hear from Andrew with regards painting Sierra Leone's democracy, the current state of affairs. How is it?
I normally come to debates like this from the point of view of evidence. So basically, the last time I checked the Afrobarometer data, Sierra Leone was third among African countries where citizens believe that they live in a democracy. And if you go on the streets today, if you ask an average APC supporter, they will say, we'll get for win 2023. So we believe that we live in a democracy. We believe that political parties have the power to change a government, or citizens have the power to change a government that they think is not good for them. It is always good for us to look back to see how far we've come and where we're coming from. In 1996, let me just shed light a little bit on electoral democracy, because there are many facets. As Mercella was saying, you're talking about democracy and human rights, talking about democracy and development. But now the big game in town is electoral democracy. You realize that in 1996, the Electoral Commissioner at the time, James Jonah, actually sat down President Tijan Kaba and his contender at the time, like John Kerry Fastmat, after there was multiple overvoting, and he said, "Can I take 100,000 of your vote or so to give to the other challenger?" And he said yes. So elections at that time were mad with fraud, right? So then came Christiana Top. Madam Christiana Top, you can say what you may, she added a different layer of electoral integrity. 477 polling stations were cancelled. SFPP cried foul. And since that time, you know what? Political parties are now afraid of overvoting. Our democracy is becoming stronger. It's not just good to celebrate that we've changed government twice in the last 14 years, but it's also good to look at the content. What is going into that change of government? How are institutions performing? Under Infa Ali, we saw the growth in the democracy. Of course, under Kone, you see, just last a couple of months ago, we are discussing the public elections bill. Now we're talking about how do we ensure that for every 3 nominations by political parties, one of them has to be a woman. So it means we are not only deepening free, fair elections, we are deepening inclusivity in our elections. It has challenges. There are many challenges. I don't want to dwell on the challenges for now, but in short, there is quite a cause to celebrate.
All right. Mr. Minister.
Yes, sir.
Where do your government see Sierra Leone's democracy?
Our democracy is alive and well. It's healthy. We have come a long way. Colleagues before me have narrated our long odyssey to where we are now. So I will concentrate on a few things that even the blind could see that is currently happening. Very recently, we had a very major, campaign to sensitize citizens not to register during the midterm census. You remember that?
Right.
But when it's about time to register for elections registration, all of us, everybody, it's all over the place, campaigning for people to come out and register to vote for them when the time comes. So that means there's still abiding trust in democracy and the peaceful changes of government, right? Andrew put it so very well that You talk to an average APC supporter, they will say they will bounce back to power, right? Only when, God knows, but that's for another conversation. The other bit is, a lot of things have happened to give comfort that this democracy is alive and well. Before now, leaders before President Bill needed to be given a nudge. Campaigns had to be by civil society. Development partners had to intervene to leverage so that leaders could announce election dates. This played out very well in 2018. But today, His Excellency had announced the election date for June next year, and everybody now has time. You can, because there's predictability, greater predictability around it. So that's very important as well. Again, democracy has fundamental benchmarks. You have to have a free press. His Excellency has, in his spirit of wanting to ensure that this democracy on all its cylinders, removed the criminal libel law, 1955. Yeah, criminal libel law. That law is the president's age mate. Governments have come and gone, right? Nobody was audacious enough to do that. He's done that, 55 years old. To his credit, right? So today, you have a thriving landscape for the development of the media. You have, for example, 230 registered newspapers. When I checked a few days ago, the IMC, this is 30%, about 30-40% up from where it was when we took over. You have about 212 radio stations across this country, right? You have about 24 local licensed TV stations. You have 11 direct-to-home televisions. You have 10 magazines, all of them operating here. This is a benchmark of a functioning democracy, right? Again, just to ensure that we are on the right, we have seen bold frame-breaking reforms being undertaken by this administration, in addition to the ones I have mentioned. As I speak to you, there is a gender equality and empowerment law in Parliament, which my dear sister here supports, right? These are issues that have been raised by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the Human Rights Commission, and many other local and international observer groups during elections, right? It was even part of the TRC recommendations. So this has been a step to address that inequality. That law is in Parliament, and I want to use this opportunity to enjoin Parliament, to be gracious enough to stand up and be counted the way they did when they repealed the criminal libel law, the way they did when they abolished the death penalty, the way they did when they enacted the cybersecurity and crime law. Right?
So let's get to the specifics, and I'm going to start off with you on that. Yeah. You talked about how governments before now have been coerced, so to speak, for them to announce elections dates. Yes, but let's go back. We saw, for example, where the appointment of the Western Region chairperson for the Electoral Commission was questioned. Many said no. This appointment is coming at a time when we feel like the president is appointing cronies, giving space to people that can actually help him to continue his stay in power. Is that part of the plan of actually creating a space that democracy can thrive in?
Well, so you said many people were opposed to her election, but many more people were in support of her election, her appointment. That is why it went through Parliament resoundingly. In fact, the fact that there were debates around it, the fact that there were concerns all over the place, is proof positive that our democracy is indeed alive and well. The debates happened, but in the end, a lot more people preferred her. They supported her appointment. That is why she's imposed.
Majority of the political parties cried and said, no, we don't want her. We know what she did at the PPRC. In fact, she was responsible for the division in many political parties.
I have a feeling majority is having a new meaning for this conversation, because this thing was debated in Parliament. It was put to a vote. She won the day. There were concerns that they had not been contacted, but letters were published. The PPRC letters were published. We saw it.
I would come to the issue of consultation.
We spoke about it here, right? Yeah. The APA was consulted. Political parties were consulted. All of those. So it could not have failed the acid test.
All right. Andrew, let me hear you on the appointment of the Western Region Chairperson. I mean, when we talk about giving a space for credible, fair, and transparent elections, we also talk about those who will be running the elections. When the Western Chairperson was appointed, many political parties put forward that, first of all, we were never consulted. We were only informed that the president has appointed, if I was not even informing us of him going to appoint, but he informed us that he has appointed already Zainab Awamosiri as the Western Region Chairman for the Electoral Commission. And to them, that was in fact a breach of the very law that provides and gives the president, Mr. President, you should consult with other political parties before making this appointment. So many political parties started having that thought of, wait a minute, I think we're losing trust and confidence in this process. And that is where the current party or current government is saying, wait, I think we've done extremely well. We've been very democratic with the way we've handled the election processes going forward.
Thank you very much. You know, I would like to bounce the question back to you. I mean, with all
Unfortunately, I will not answer.
Definitely.
Well, go ahead.
No, I mean, with all your years,
yeah,
with all your years in journalism, in the media, you know, what is broadly undefined in the governance landscape is the question of consultation.
Right.
So, and we'll be battling with that. What do you mean by consultations? Is it when the president says, you know, is information sufficient to be consultation? Or does consultation mean sharing control over policy making, over decision making? And what does the share of control mean? So it's broadly undefined in the Constitution. So that's why, to me, it's always good, you know, for us to look at how is the executive configured, how is the executive structured. It really brings me to the way the current, the former, and the Kaba executive were structured. For Ahmed Tijan Kaba, 80% of his presidential decisions were actually driven by his advisors. So you had a very active advisory group, and that advisory group actually reviews cabinet papers, and they brief the president on those cabinet decisions, those cabinet papers, before decisions are made. And it's always good. I mean, going to this election, I think those are the things we actually need to advocate. What should be the configuration of the next government? We actually need a situation where when they say this person is the president, is the fountain of honor, the fountain of justice, the decision has to be driven more by policy rather than by politics. Because the president is a politician. So the politicians is more concerned about the next election than the next generation. So one of the safeguards, I mean, that Tijan Kaba actually did very well was to get a robust advisory council that should profile advice. And I could say authoritatively that 80% of the advice of advisors were actually taken on board. Because when you bring ministers on the table, to be honest, with all due respect, Mr. Soare, they are all politicians. They think their thinking is really short term. Their thinking is the next election, and maybe, with all due respect, they wouldn't want someone that would, you know, this advice is not good. Let us think about it alternatively. So, if we are talking about inclusivity at the highest level, I don't want to pigeonhole it to the appointment of Zainab Mosiri, but it's really the entire state architecture as to how decisions are made and in whose interest, and how do we ensure we give primacy to policy and not politics.
So why I ask the question, I mean, is crucial, taking into consideration the timing. Now that, I mean, we have about 9 months to the 2023 general elections, and the government is saying we've been very democratic, and the processes leading up to the elections, we've carried those processes in a manner that democracy dictates. So consultation in your democratic and governance point of view, what does consultation constitute in this?
So it has to. What does consultation mean? Sharing control over decision, or does consultation mean informing? So if consultation means informing, then you say I've informed them, I've consulted.
That I have made a decision.
But in participatory democracy, consultation actually means stakeholders sharing control over decisions. So if you have people crying that it's always fair to have you sit around the table to say, this is the reason why I'm doing this. And so you reason with one another. That's consultation in the true sense of the word. It doesn't minimize the work of the Electoral Commission. Right. And don't get me wrong, it doesn't minimize the work of the Commission. We just completed an opinion poll which we are publishing this week on the work of NEC in the 16 by-elections in the last 18 to 24 months. It may surprise you to see, because we asked citizens from constituency 110 to the least ward that has been, where by-elections have been held. We asked them, are you satisfied with the results? We had 78% of people saying, yes, we are satisfied with the results of the elections. And then we said, are you satisfied with the Electoral Commission? Because citizens are satisfied with the results, the rating of the Electoral Commission went up. This is in 16 by-election catchment communities. And then we stepped out. Outside of by-election catchment communities, where you see these conversations now about trust, the contestation, the rating, the approval rating of the Electoral Commission comes down. So that's why the more people cry about this, things like that, it has implication for trust of institutions.
All right. Mercella, let me hear you. I mean, the good thing, your head also carries the crown of the National Elections Watch. It's something you're very much involved in. Let's go back. We saw what that brought at the time when the appointment was made, when political parties, especially those that tagged themselves as Consortium of Progressive Political Parties, when they came out saying, the law says, Mr. President, you have to do this appointment in consultation with other political parties, but you did not do that. Instead, you've informed us that you've made this appointment. That is a clear breach. But again, you have the lawyers who came out saying, wait, so whether or not the president consults, it's in no way a breach of the very laws that govern Sierra Leone, because you have the very 1991 constitution that says, hey, you do not have the power to inquire into the decision of the president. So where does that put democracy?
Democracy and understanding the dynamics around the people are it's really just like democracy. If somebody will ask no constitution, so I would choose actually 5 years. I would choose to start this end of the act. Or somebody will ask me, you consult? I said yes, but I've consulted with this end of the room because I think they align to my interests and my views. But who constitutes the people? Indeed, I consulted. But the whole idea is, how do we build trust around this? How do we bring different and divergent? We need to understand that democracy rests on 3 fundamentals. The ability of contestation. I normally tell people, you cannot love democracy and hate opposition. You cannot love democracy and hate opposing views. That is no. Because the very precept in which democracy is built is on choices. It presupposes that right from the start, the proponents of democratic values believe that Samuel, Minister Swari, Andrew, Mercella, and Mr. Berete are not the same. It starts from that premise. We are not the same. We do not think the same. We do not like the same things. We do not like the same colors, but we are equal. Equality doesn't mean that we are the same. And that's where, for example, the perceptions of women's inclusions of persons with disability comes in. We don't need to look alike. We don't need to think the same. We don't need to be physically structured the same. We discussed that against. So bringing people together, and that's where electoral processes, the principle of elections, presuppose that we must create a level playing field. When people contest views, they have a position why they do that. And that's why consultation is very important. You have the opportunity to hear the other side. How it is done is a different ball game altogether. But the whole ability is about people to the table, understanding where we stand. And in my opinion, I know Sierra Leoneans. They are not people who would say no to decisions. In fact, consultation doesn't mean you have to agree with the decisions of others. It's about putting forward why you want a particular position to go forward. And it creates a safer space for people to coexist. It creates a safer space for people to participate and to understand, for example, where this person is coming from. Many people believe that apolitical and independent people should be running electoral processes because they would feel confident, about the process, and a fundamental principle is about transparency. They would open up the process to interrogation. So a number of people believe that once you have somebody who is close, once you have somebody who has a history of, closing the space, they could not feel comfortable working with that person. So now, when you
does that in any way breed paranoia within the space?
Of course, mistrust, and it's a fundamental downside of democratic practice. So even part of the issues that are going right now, I see a number of misinformation going around on the registration process. That's where it started. So even when you do the correct thing, people do not trust where the decision is coming from, because right from the start, you have not created the space to bring them along, for them to understand who runs the commission, on whose interest is the people's interest should be paramount. And so we need to understand that there are times when we push for certain parameters and principles, is for the long run. When you go in the long run, you find out that when we get to this stage, there's hardly anything you can do because the damage has already been done in the past. So I think it's something we need to learn from. Consultation presupposes making sure that each and every individual, groups and parties understand where we want to go with a particular decision. Right. Take note, I did not say accept. Understands where we want to go with a particular.
You're not seeking validation. All right. Brett, let me listen to you with regards to consultation. What does the concept mean in a democratic state?
Democracy in itself, some people only focus on the legal sovereignty of the state. They focus on the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. But within the political space, we are also talking about political sovereignty, the people. And the people, of course, their views are represented by their elected officials. That is why one of the conspicuous hallmarks of democracy and leadership is consensus building. I don't think it will hurt at all if Mr. President were to call the various political parties to say, hey, these are 3 names I have in mind, as per law, of course, to say I wanted to get a Western Area Electoral Commissioner. At the end of the day, you are given space because you are also mindful of the fact that the person you are going to appoint is going to preside over a very pertinent component in our democracy, which is elections. And therefore, if there is mistrust in that person, then you are creating some apprehensions whereby you are even sabotaging, maybe unconsciously, by moving forward with that appointment without that consensus building. That is the whole essence of democracy. There is a difference between, you know what, I will just lord it over you. This is the person I needed. And if there is a marked difference to say, you know what, let me consult these other players. They are also equally important in the political space. That means even there are critical voices it means you are also recognizing that they are complementing whatever views you may have as a policy, as a government. But those views are also critical in promoting our democracy. That is the whole thing about democracy. And that is also an aspect of peace building, if I may.
Is that something we can practice in a political space like Sierra Leone, for example? Has there been any time where a president would want to make an appointment and where the constitution or the law says you have to consult, and that president comes forward saying, I have A, B, and C. I want to make an appointment. Has there been any situation, has there been a case like that?
That is the best practice.
But it has never happened in a political space like that.
Well, I know when we're in governance, I hate to compare what happened in the past to what is happening now. But I remembered, even when Mfahali was about to be appointed as Chief Electoral Commissioner, all the respective political parties were called to a meeting, they held consultations, and there was no opposition.
But options were not given.
Options were not given. But the point is, consultations did happen. And those consultations, there were consensus reached whereby there was no opposition to his appointment. So that tells you, even though names were not tabled, but at the end of the day, he was accepted by the other political parties. That was why you can say there was no rancor when he was running these elections, because trust was built by having the other people involved. And this is where, when people were saying, oh, in the past government, we were coerced to name a date for the elections, I don't think that is very disingenuous for very obvious reasons, because the Constitution is very clear when we should be having elections and when Parliament should go on recess. There was no coercion. I was one of those who came very eloquently to say, you know what, the President is going to make it very clear. And again, in consultation with the President, the Chief Electoral Commissioner announced the date for the elections. I think that is democracy. And the whole essence of our democracy is we live by a constitution. The moment we try to abort the constitution to make political gains, then that becomes abhorrent. And the reason why I'm emphasizing on that, I hear the minister talking about, yes, I was one of those who commended the government for repealing Part 5 of the 1965 criminal libel law, because some of us suffered under that when we were sent to prison. The reason why I commended the government, we tried it, but it didn't come into law. But at the same time, it has been replaced by a cyber law, which today people are very much aware to say, you know what, I should be mindful what I say. You can't believe how disturbed I am even when coming to the studio. People are saying, oh, be careful what you go talk. Then why are the way they go then they? So that's paranoid. So that perception is out there. And that is not good for our democracy.
We'll come to talk about that. I mean, the freedom of expression, that is something very critical, and it also forms part of the things we'll be discussing. But let me quickly hear you on, let's have a response on the issue of consultation.
This is so interesting. My brother, you asked a very poignant question as to whether an alternative was presented in the course of consultation for the former Chief Electoral Commissioner. Well, we are used to this as a country. I mean, we were presented choices from 1978 to 1992. You take this, you lost, you take this, you lost option. It was a one-party state. But here they tell us we had options, right? Until 1992 when things started to change. So we are used to it. So you talk about consultations, back then when we were in school, almost all of us here are probably part of the same school generation. I mean, let's even if that makes Andrew feel good that we are age mates. So back then in school, they used to define a market for us as a place where buyers and sellers meet to discuss the price of a commodity, right? Today, a market is any medium, any mechanism through which negotiations could happen for the price of a commodity. It could be on eBay, it could be on any kind of thing, right? So, in much the same way, there are, language is quite dynamic, it evolves. Consultations can have several meanings. You don't necessarily have to assemble under one roof, right? But the fact of the matter is that We had the upper chairperson here, which is the umbrella organization for political parties. He hosted him. He did say they were consulted. Other political parties read their letters. And in fact,
and I hosted other political parties, they denied they were not consulted.
To her credit, Samuel, we talk about winning the constituency 110, where IGR had done a survey to test the trust and confidence in the Electoral Commission. That election happened under her watch, I think, and she returned a very credible election to her credit. So for me, the proof of the pudding is always in the eating.
So the competence of Zainab was never questioned. The competence of Zainab was never questioned. I think what was questioned...
Let me tell you, this is not going to be loud enough. A whole lot of the noise comes from fringe political parties who do not even have a representation in parliament. Those who are in parliament had an ample opportunity to debate Zainab Hawa Mosire's candidature or her nomination. They had enough time, and at the end of the day, those who supported it prevailed in numbers. That is how you test electoral democracy. That is how parliamentary democracy works.
So are we going to?
I wanted to speak briefly about the cyber law.
No, we'll come to that. I'll give you time. Okay. So when we talk about consolidating the democracy now, if we are to lay the tracks, for a thriving one, Berete described it as one that is fledgling. If we are to lay the tracks now for a thriving democracy, what should we do with this word, democracy? Because the word consultation. Do we just leave it as as we are now interpreting it in our own understanding that it's ambiguous? The Constitution does not in any way stipulate what form consultation should take. Let's just write a letter, inform you, and it's also a form of consultation. Yeah. So what should be done? Should we just limit it to like how Lavalier say? Una the politician, they always tune one for doing
in fact, next election. I want to respond.
So how do we deal with that? How do we deal with that to avoid the rancor
friends, but
it
we profoundly agree on many things. To tar us with that long brush of only thinking about the next election is not fair. A government, politicians that think about the next elections will not be investing in the next generation of leaders. We have introduced free quality education. That's an investment in the next generation of leaders. Politicians who typically want to suppress and oppress others will not repeal a criminal libel law. Politicians who look for instant gratification will not abolish the death penalty. They want to keep it as stick behind the mouth. So I think that description does not fit us very much. They will keep playing around. After me, you talk about tenure elongations like we have seen in the past, right? Even if not outrightly changing election states. So it's very important that we are family on cause. Anyway, I'm going to stay focused on this. Yeah? So I think we are family on cause somewhere.
Okay.
We are family on cause. The 1991 Constitution has served us for some time. Now we have seen reason to make a few amendments, to review it. The Constitutional Review Committee was set up, 80-plus-man committee. We spent billions on it. So probably this is also an opportunity to look at what shape and form consultations will take going forward.
All right. Yeah. I'm going to start off with you, Mercella, on the issue of free speech, the space. How have we narrowed the democratic space for people, for citizens to voice out their concerns? We've seen over time where citizens would want to take to the streets to register their frustration, their disgruntlement over certain decisions, and even over the conditions of living, and where politicians have also wanted to score political goals. That space has never been given if it's going to be an anti-protest. But we've seen over time, not just in these 4 years of VSLPP, it's been there for the longest of time. But looking at the context right now, we saw what happened August 10th when people took to the streets. The consequences, some would not love to say them. Where does the space, or how would you describe the space currently? That's democratic space for citizens to voice out their frustrations and feel like, it's a democracy. Like I read very recently the U.S. Embassy putting out a statement saying true democracy is where citizens do not feel afraid to voice out their concerns and they will not be intimidated.
So absolutely, civil liberties are fundamental principles of democracy. The right to free speech without fear of reprisal, and equally the right to assembly. Today, as head of campaign for good governance, I feel less inclined to speak.
Why is that?
If head of campaign for good governance feels less inclined to speak, then you know that the democratic space is shrinking.
You feel threatened?
It's shrinking because the contestation is too high. The contestation is about political power and access to political authority and access to political opportunity. So people do not want to see the other side of things. People do not want to hear the other side. People do not want to understand why is it that we should look at, another direction, or why is it that we need to look at what does this mean for citizens' welfare and benefits. Opposing views. I said democracy without opposing views and choices is no democracy. So it's just one-way thinking, right? Even if it is good, we would want to interrogate how we can make it better. And even if it is better, we might want to add value to say, why can't we have the best from the situation? But when you close the space because you believe it is good, any other person bringing an other idea is anti. We do not want to listen to you. You are less inclined to give your views. You see, the institution, Campaign for Good Governance, have been supportive with the return of democracy from 1997. My predecessor, Aja Zainab Awabangura, was in exile in Guinea.
I was part of that.
Of course. It was with Campaign for Good Governance then. The entire organization was in exile in Guinea, so that to mobilize and push support so that democracy returns to Sierra Leone. On the 10th of August, I was away as head of Campaign for Good Governance. I stood my ground. I said, in this country, we have made a decision long ago that it is only through the ballot box and constitutionalism that this country would stand. These are the parameters. So when we bring alternate views, it is not about you are not in the interest of any government, you are not in the interest of what we do. It's about making sure that citizens' participation, which is fundamental to democratic practices, is infused into it. And people feel that this is my government, because government is not for a certain set of people. So a pattern has emerged in Sierra Leone. Whilst it is, this is ours, and that's about, it's us versus them. And you see, it's a dangerous trend, and it is not pointing to any one of the two major political parties. We are building a negative political culture of silence, making sure that certain groups of people, you see, in a society, in a democratic society, you have what you call the citizen-state relationship. Everybody has their role. Government, parliament, civil society, media, international community. All of us have our roles to play. So you cannot silence civil society. The next space, I said, some of us are less inclined to speak because they don't take our views. In fact, they organize people to attack us. As the head of Campaign for Good Governance, I've been on the front line of attacks systematically for things I know and otherwise believe. I know political parties who are pushing certain newspapers to write negative things about my person. And this is so for every other person who was standing on the side of democracy.
If you feel, Mercella, if you feel threatened and you feel that speech,
I'm not feeling threatened. I am just saying what the status quo is. If I was threatened, I would not be in this space.
If you feel that space is not conducive for you to thrive, Mercella, then the question is, the ordinary citizens, what does this mean? What does this mean for them? Because in any democratic state, power, they say, belongs to the people. So if you who have a voice, as powerful as it is, now you think that space is being narrowed or you're being gagged, and when you come out, you're being attacked, then what does this mean for our democracy?
In fact, for the ordinary citizens, it is worse. And that's why we need to encourage, so that we look at a political culture that would otherwise bring opposing views and choices to the fore. Opportunities for consultations. I would keep every day referring to former and the late President Ahmad Tijan Kaba. Then we were really young at campaign for good governance. I was just coming from college.
Right.
You know, the late president would say, you know, during that period, it was a period of post-conflict reconstruction. So a number of processes were ongoing to bring the state back on track. And he would look around the room and he would not see us. And former president would say, why them picking in a campaign for good governance? Una go call them come. How come they know they? This was how, you know, leaders believe. I mean, I begin to wonder what were the contributions we were giving in those days. We were youths, but our presence and our input, our knowledge base were valued. So what we have moved on to is co-optation and segregation to legitimize processes. Some processes are very good. You don't even need to co-opt like-minded civil society. They are very good. You bring civil society to the table, all they will tell you, add X, add Y, open it up. Because they are very legitimate processes. They are very good processes. So you have civil society now. I mean, you see civil society fragmented, divided on the lines of supporting certain interests, and it is wrong. Because in every society, civil society must be given the space to organize themselves, to hear their views, and where possible, the relationship between government and civil society should be that of complementarity and checks and balances.
Andrew, let me get
Thank you.
You belong to that fraternity.
Yeah.
And looking at happenings across Sierra Leone, we know evidently for many who've come forward that they, for example, who wants to hold a protest, they'll come back and say, or we'll see a letter from the police saying, because of security reasons, you are not permitted to hold this protest, and all of that. And citizens, some are saying, we do not even have the space to voice our concerns, because when you do so, you are either attacked, so they do not have the security to do so in their estimation. Where does that put us as a nation, especially in the build-up to the 2023 elections, when many would want to voice out their concerns, their disgruntlement against whether it's the current state of affairs or against an opposition political? But how does it work?
You know, again, back to data. The last time I checked, when August 10 happened, so we did a survey in Bo, Kenema, Freetown, McKinney. So 2 districts where the riots occurred and 2 districts that are riot-free. And we just wanted to get the perspective from both sides. And there was convergence on a particular point, which really, to me, it gladdens my heart, that people should be given scope to demonstrate. 75% of citizens were saying, if you request for permission, you should be granted permission. It gladdens my heart. And so we asked, but how do you see the August 10 demonstration? You had about 42% or thereabouts saying, we think it was hijacked. We had about 35% of them saying it was really, a protest about economic hardship. And then we have about 22% saying it was a coup. So why is this important? Why is this important? It is important in the light of the conversation that we have. What does protest mean to Sierra Leoneans? I think we need to master this art of understanding, the meaning of, this democratic concept, protest. Protest to me means, coming out with a placard if I don't have water at home to demonstrate. It's the word demonstrate, that I don't have water at home. When August 10 was announced, people closed their stalls, they closed their wares, they put their wares on hold because they thought protest means violence. I think we actually need, as Sierra Leoneans, as government practitioners or experts, to sit. In fact, that's one strong recommendation coming from that paper. We actually need to sit with the Sierra Leone police. The Sierra Leone police need to master the art of managing dissent. So when Femi Klodo said, we want to demonstrate, if I'm the head of the police, I will say, yes. Where do you want to do it? Do you want to go to Sarah Ground Field, or do you want to go to Aberdeen Field? Do you want to organize media? You can be given 4 hours. You demonstrate what you want to demonstrate. The media covers it, and you go home. So, but this idea of people not feeling, people feeling not given the scope to demonstrate. I don't think it's good for our democracy. I think where I differ a bit from Mercella is that at our level, I believe that we have freedom to speak. I believe the things that I've said under Bio, the things that I've said under Kuruma, I've never had a sudden knock on my door, right? But when you talk about intolerance and extremism, it's on both sides. I've heard people on guerrilla radio station from abroad abusing me, abusing my mom in unprintable language. So I think what we've heightened is intolerance.
Is that what Mercella is saying? The war of, people wage war of calumny against your personality.
So how come you differ?
No,
That's
so
exactly what I'm saying.
so that's
Been attacked.
To me, what I encourage political parties to do is to, you have to raise the game a little bit. Focus the conversation on policy. The moment political parties focus the conversation on policy and deviate from character, then they'll begin to shepherd citizens on that platform. But what I see, this is Loko, this is Limba, this is Yalunka, this is, and again, the media, with all due respect, the media needs to play a role in ensuring that we midwife that process where political parties actually focus on policy. I think what is lacking is, for example, if I've not seen a conversation, for example, on energy, a conversation on, if you're talking about human rights, it's a whole debate altogether for citizens to talk about how do we grow human rights? What is the infrastructure for human rights protection? So, but we are not seeing that. And until and unless we get to that point, we'll reverse our gains. Today, if you look at freedom, I think this Minister Suare will better speak to this issue on ratings on Freedom House, ratings on TI. These ratings are impressive. It's not me saying that. It's not Mercella saying that. It's not the opposition or government. It's people who know that if you come to AYV, and by the way, we currently collecting information on trolling. We've collected data of about 20,000 text messages on AYV and 98.1. Some that I am in, some that Mercella is in, on people who stole. Of course, we adopted that from the Russian trolling. We've seen that we out of the 20,000 messages that come in, we said, who are the 10 most frequent texters that actually stalk and stroll, and they don't know. We've collected data on even their Facebook pages. It's all politics. So it's a few people who actually gang around. They try to bastardize your platform. If an unsuspecting person will now come and see, no, this is how Mercella looks.
Is that how Lavalier looks. Is that not being deliberate? Say it's part of the architecture being created by the political parties?
Exactly. And it's meant to guard the space. Yeah. It's meant to constrict it. And I think this is where we actually need to collaborate. How do we come against trollers? If at all I am on radio or Berete is on radio, then you go and keep attacking Berete. We should have a mechanism to pull that person out. That's the only way we safeguard our democracy in a context where the society is much more polarized.
Berete, let me hear you on the issue of freedom of association, assembly, expression, and all of that. You were talking about how you commended the government for repealing Part 5 of the 1965 Criminal Libel Law, which many of us have said, oh, kudos, this is needed in a democratic space. So where has that put our democracy, with citizens now being afraid? Some, according to them, things coming in, and according to what Mercella is now saying, and the things we see every now and then, if I go on the text messages, the things I would see there, it's crazy. So where does it put it?
It's unfortunate that one of the strong voices of our democracy in this country is feeling this way. And just like you rightly put it, if she feels this way, what about the ordinary person on the street out there? And the right to demonstrate, the right to assembly. If you go to chapter 3 of our Constitution, is very clear, the right to associate. And this is a message for the government as well. You have to create the space and respect critical voices, not just those voices that will come and give you kudos. They had the feelers. People in Kenema, when they said they should stay away from the going to sell that day, what happened? They went and destroyed their stalls. We saw that. So at the end of the day, those who came out, we saw them with placards. What happened? That was a moment whereby if the government didn't listen to the people, all of us condemned the violence, because we have suffered a lot in the hands of violence in this country. But when the demonstration happened, the president missed an opportunity.
Which was?
An opportunity whereby he can say, you know what? If I were in his shoes, I'll say, I hear you. We condemn violence. That is not the way we can do it. But rather, if you just single out the police officers that were murdered that day in very despicable ways and gave them a civic funeral, and the other civilians who were killed potently and clearly contradicted the president's statement to say, you know what, I will be a president for all Sierra Leoneans. Today, there is divisiveness in this country. That will have been a moment to bring the country together, to heal. But if you just focus on the police and not the other civilians who were killed, some of them, as reports had it, were gunned down through ashtray bullets. Are they not Sierra Leoneans? Should they go and wait at the mortuary for people to identify their bodies, while some other Sierra Leoneans were given civic funeral dignities? So that was a missed opportunity. All of us condemn the violence in no uncertain terms, but we must continue to create the space. And even when the president went on, first it was the vice president. I saw saying it was the APC. The next thing, it was the coup they wanted. The next thing, they were insurrectionists. They used all those derogatory terms, which of course is not good for this country. And after naming and labeling, then you said, I'm going to constitute an investigative committee. That was a missed opportunity. It would have been first an investigative committee. That way they can come out with their findings. In fact, some legal minds are with the opinion that it should have been a commission of inquiry, an inquiry into those events. That way people could be subpoenaed to appear so that we can get a bigger picture. That was a missed opportunity.
Are the politicians using that space? Oh, wait, when people want to go out, let's see how we can influence them and see what crisis they will unleash on this country. Well, I mean, we've seen it's a myth. Many have said the politicians always exploit these guys and they go out. So when they do that, then it comes back to the government. So the government is now saying, wait, we know, for example, that these people have been influenced, facilitated, financially by politicians.
Then the establishment of an investigative committee becomes moribund. As long as the government, in your own words, if they have incontrovertible evidence to suggest that politicians, particularly labeling the APC, then what is the point of establishing an investigative committee? And besides, where did they get the evidence to say all of those people who demonstrated were APC people? APC has its own members, people who believe in the party. If the leadership wanted to call a demonstration, I think they would say, you know what? We are calling on all APC supporters.
The slogan chanted during the protest would suggest that a matter must go.
So does that mean it is the opposition or the APC? I don't think there is any correlation to that. Because at the end of the day, the people were crying because of the economic hardship in this country, whereby nobody needed to go to an economics 101 class to know that things are hard in this country. So if the people don't have that critical space to express their views and rather took to the street to demonstrate. I saw a clip whereby when the soldiers, the military, went and met with the protesters, there was no violence. Rather, the protesters were chanting, "Soldier team, soldier team." So the question then is, what went wrong? So this is where you've already labeled the APC, which some of us don't take very kindly to, and we want to say the president missed an opportunity. Just like how he missed an opportunity when we went to Bintumani to talk about a National Cohesion Commission, whereby some legal critical voices, they spoke truth to power, and they were attacked. They were lampooned in various ways. In a democracy, democracy is not just going to the ballot box to cast a vote. It is a continuum whereby all those critical spaces, I remember some of us, we struggled. August 18, 1997, we brought all our students to demonstrate to restore the SLPP to power following the AFRC coup. At that time, to some of the antagonists, we were being used by the RUF. Some others who are pro-democrats, the SLPP commended us that yes, you guys are doing a patriotic duty to stand for democracy and justice. And for us, we believe the space, that critical space, it is not owned by government. It is not owned by the executive. They are presiding over it so that they can give right to the political sovereigns of the state, who are the people. That is why I always go with the maxim that the power of the people is always powerful more than the people in power.
Mr. Minister,
yes, sir.
So your government is gagging the space and the people not to exercise their democratic rights. People have views they want to share with your government, for example, in critical ways, but you would not want them to be critical. You just want them to come and praise, sing you. And so when they don't, then it becomes a problem. Is that the situation?
Yeah. Even the people who say it do not believe what they say. If anybody said it so poignantly the way you did. A government that does not listen, that wants to constrain the democratic space, will not be providing fertile ground for more and more newspapers to register, to publish. Every day you see blaring headlines, very uncomplimentary of government, but none of those newspaper editors have ever been called in for questioning. Same for the radio stations. Radio stations are dotted all over the country. Samuel, you host some of the most critical programs here. I don't think you've ever had a midnight knock on your door. You've never had a call to report. All of these things. That cannot be a government that is constraining the democratic space. Okay? So you talk about free speech, civil society. Our relationship with civil society, I mean, we have had a very organized and structured way to relate and dialogue with civil society on matters that concern all Sierra Leoneans, right? I mean, they are proof positive, they have attended those sessions, and their insights and inputs to key government policies have been quite valuable. So to assume or to even present a situation as if civil society is being, put on the fringes, is not being consulted, I think that is not true, and they know it themselves. I mean, this is the one government that has done it. It's institutionalized. The vice president leads those dialogue sessions. I was at the last one in Poloko, where education and other thematic areas were discussed. So that cannot be true.
The people who are championing that, I spoke to some of them the other day, and they said, in fact, that forum or that platform is already in coma.
Well, I don't even know if it's sick. But now that you bring it to my attention, I'll raise it to the appropriate authorities. I'm not aware of that. But I'm aware, like they do, that we have had sessions with them, and those they made valuable inputs, and some of them were reflected in policy positions. Right. So, on your news summary, you mentioned a woman who was sentenced to 2 years in prison in Makeni for parading naked, in public as part of her manifestations, her own demonstrations on August 10th. These are the things, there are clearly laws against it. This is a country of law and order. The Public Order Act clearly, right, makes provisions against those things. So when you go against it and the law takes its course, that is what they call constraining the democratic space, right? The law took its course and she's having a 2-year sentence. So talk about freedom of association. I am one of the biggest adherents of that, the right to protest freely, openly. I mean, this is supposed to be part of the palm oil by which democracy should be consumed. Right? People should have that right to assemble, to express dissenting views. But even the very constitution that stipulates, that makes provision for that, I mean, also prioritizes orderliness. The police will always say, when you want to process on a matter that concerns you or public interest or whatever interest, right? There are clearly laid down procedures. You have to advise the police of the reason why you want to do it. Probably they might they might give you alternative ideas. You know, you will need to be policed. You will need to be routed. You will need logistics and other things. So when a group of faceless people demonstrate and put at risk the hard-won peace, you know, that we currently enjoy, no responsible government sits idly by to see that happen. We say we support the right to demonstrate freely, to express dissenting views, but when you want to do it, you know, like Femi and others, she comes across very dishonestly when she puts some of these positions. In the previous engagement, there are clearly letters. They sat with the police. This was PPP or something, women, The woman wanted to demonstrate. They wrote a letter to the then IGP. He sat with them. They agreed to defy it. She came out there and still went ahead to do it. That is lawlessness and brigandage. That is not peaceful demonstration. I mean, we have to understand this. On August 10th, you know, people who had not gone through laid down rules as provided for by the Public Order Act, by the Constitution, by all of these things, yeah, they processed violently, right? They had self-loading machine guns, and as a precursor to that, you have a ventriloquist for somebody who sits out there in the US, in Netherlands or somebody. He was saying they will take over State House, they will take over State House, they will take over Parliament building, they will bomb people in their cars and all of those. That is not a peaceful protest. That is a violent insurrection. That is a violent insurrection. And we saw that manifested, it played out onto the streets. People were killed, including 6 serving police officers. That is not what a protest is, right? And judging from the things that unfolded, this was a coup unraveling. This was a coup unraveling.
Perpetrated by?
Well, we know this was a well-lubricated process. It was well-organized. People were mobilized for it. It was well-funded and clinically unleashed.
By
people who are in opposition to government. Definitely. By people I'm part of this government, and government is the biggest, probably one of the biggest beneficiaries of a peaceful, tranquil, and stable nation. Because that's the only way you are able to govern peacefully, right? That's the only climate in which you can attract foreign direct investment. That's the only climate in which you can attract tourism and, you know, grow your economy to be able to create jobs for the myriad army of unemployed young people and all of those things.
Are you also taking into consideration the economic factors that would have propelled that? Because even I think it was yesterday or the day before yesterday in Tunisia, people took to the streets.
I'll come there. We are talking about free speech. There is something they call responsible free speech. When leaders who seek to lead our country make it a pastime to incite tribal hate, to make tribal bigotry, they are stuck in trade, they will have a problem. Very recently, the former APC flag bearer, McKinney, he was speaking through his state, telling people in this government, nobody who goes by this name, that's tribal bigotry, right? We want to piece this country together. I mean, in testimony to those who have laid down their lives so that we can enjoy peace, tranquility, and stability. Again, you have the mayor here. I mean, she says she cannot work with a Bo Abese. Kamokai will come and say Bo Abese. When people who aspire to lead our great nation do things like those, they are constraining the democratic space. Because people who associate themselves with Bo Abese will even be afraid to speak up in McKinney. They will be afraid to speak up in mayor's office and all of those things.
Are those comments you're referring to a smoking gun for the August 10 carnage?
Well, all of them are part of the smoking guns, if you like. Okay. All of them are part of it. So let me come back to my brother Liberties' comments. This president, I mean, he's been away. He's not been here. I have said on your radio here that for this President Julius Maada Bio, he values every Sierra Leonean life. That is why he had commissioned us to ensure that we'll do everything humanly possible to ensure that those Sierra Leonean civilians who died are also given a decent, befitting burial. right? We have, if you were here, you would have known that we have been putting out public announcements calling on family members who lost loved ones during August 10 to come forward and identify the corpses, so that it's a logical thing. Post-mortem has to be done. All of those things. You have to have family members present. Those things have been done. Last time I checked, you have about 80% of people who have now identified their loved ones. Procedures have been undergone. We have clear timelines to give them a befitting burial. And all of the things we did to the police, we might do it might not be the same, but we'll ensure that they get befitting burial. These are Sierra Leoneans, Sierra Leonean lives. We value them, each and every one. This president is very compassionate, and will not just be burying them, we'll also be ensuring that we support the family to some extent. Right? So, Abla, you are not here. I mean, this is something you should know.
Well, even
just so that you know.
Here in person physically, that doesn't mean I'm oblivious. I'm not.
Well, all of the things I have said, you could have.
Because at the end of the day, I was talking about what happened when the civic funeral was done. There was no acknowledgement that other Sierra Leoneans were killed. I stand to be corrected. Of course, I followed it very religiously.
I'll favor you a speech.
So at the end of the day, for me, I want the president to seize the opportunity. That will have been a golden opportunity. Instead of naming and labeling the opposition, just like how the minister is seated here, an elected official, blaming the opposition that they were planning a coup. That was weaponizing their supporters. Just like how a resident minister would say, you know what, if you challenge this government, your parents will wear black. We'll make sure we kill you. Those are weaponizing statements. Those were, and those were like removing those people. Those were weaponizing your supporters. Because at the end of the day, it is like saying, you know what, the minister say anybody who will make a mama wear black. I don't think that should be done. So we should condemn that outright.
Yeah, no, we condemn it in much the same way as we condemn Dr. Samora Kamara for saying the things he said.
All right.
Much the same way we condemn
all right, gentlemen.
saying the same things.
Gentlemen, let's move on. Yes, Marcella, I want. Yeah.
You know, I just see a microcosm of Sierra Leone.
In here.
Just in the last few seconds. To be honest, we are moving on to violence. Right? Democracy in itself but it should not be so complex that it could bring us to our knees as a country. We need to be very mindful of how we protect and safeguard the peace of this nation so that we go into election and come out as winning Sierra Leoneans. And that is why, in my opinion, the places where we have gone wrong, we should be honest enough to say it and to make quick amends and fix it. We have an opportunity to fix this country. Let us try as best as possible to safeguard the peace. And for me, I believe the Sierra Leone police has turned this country into a political playbook. I have been in this space.
Marcella, before you continue, I mean, as you talk about the protection of our peace and how do we consolidate our democracy, that is perhaps the last thing I want us to discuss. The institutions charged with the responsibility of upholding our democracy, over time, they've all been accused of politically influenced, of being used. So you talk about the police. I have always argued, for example, that the police by default is political. By default, with its council, the way it is set up. You also look at the judiciary, the way the judiciary has carried on in the last, in the years that have gone by. Many have said the judiciary should have been the hope of Sierra Leone, but it appears the judiciary, government in, government out, many, in fact, even the practitioners, those who go to that very institution, they've always said the executive appears to always have this influence, this part, telling the judiciary what to do. You look at SNEC, there's always this cry when you're in the opposition. When you are in, it's fine. So how do we get these democratic institutions to function well in the interest of Sierra Leone and Sierra Leoneans? The police, the judiciary, the NEC, all of these institutions, how do we get them? Because if we go back by what the EU put out, it's worrisome, and it appears we're in a crisis.
You say we cannot continue to do the wrong things and expect to get good results. One of the things, I'll give you an example on state institutions. If you take your minds back, we had a heated debate on the midterm census. And the institution are representing a coalition, the National Elections, what we stood our ground. Not that a midterm census was not useful, not that it was not useful for development purposes, but elections and governance has a calendar. Anything falling short of that calendar would interfere with the space, and it would be a cutback on what we should have mobilized as progress. So what happened was that the civil registration was supposed to take course. And we saw a number of problems ahead because these were issues we have highlighted in the 2018 elections report. We saw how, for example, getting credible data and accounting for the identity of every eligible citizen was a challenge. And so we said, can the government and people of Sierra Leone invest into a civil registration process where we can get all eligible Sierra Leoneans 18 and above to be accounted for with their names, full details, and biometric features? That process was not something we could hold as credible. A number of people were left out, the process was slow, a number of things went wrong with the confirmation of the civil registration process. Fast forward, a year down the line, everybody is shouting, head of National Elections Watch, where are you? Problems are going on with the registration. No, but it went wrong long time ago in the past. We tried as best as possible, we intervened, we said, forget about midterm census, concentrate on the civil data, make sure we get it right. This is only when no eligible Sierra Leonean will be left behind. We are battered, everything. Just think of what happened to us during that period, but we stood our ground. Today we are facing the consequence, and that is the consequences of bad governance. I've just given that one example for us to show a situation where what we should do now, we failed to do it, and then in the next couple of months we want things to be right. It cannot be right. The mistake has been done. So it's the same thing with our state institutions. I have said a couple of times through our advocacy platforms, let us holistically review the 1991 Constitution. That Constitution does not support a democratic state. What will happen 2016, 2015, 2014, I am going backwards. It was the SLPP who were crying. They were my best friends. I am friends with the opposition because I'm friends with democracy. In a democracy, you must like opposition because it's about opposing you. If you push opposition, there is no democracy. They were all over the place. The letters on my office table are like this in 2016, 2015, complaining. And it is the same issue today that APC are sending the same letters complaining. How do we want to continue into a political jigsaw? Why can't we fix the problem? Making sure that supreme executive authority, those issues that are cut back to the state and democracy, we address them. Appointment is a critical issue. So what we are having, for example, is what we call a regime-serving police. They will do anything, right? Today, I feel sorry. I feel sorry for those who are benefiting. One thing I like about the police, like quote unquote, they do not change. They will go to lengths to misuse and abuse power. And when the other party comes to power, they do the same thing to them. They have never changed their stance. What you want us to do, we will do it. It should not be. We are nurturing a society, a violent society. It should not be the case. Let us try as best as possible to promote professional policing, a police that is accountable and subjected to civil oversight. That's why some of us believe that the police should be put forward to scrutiny, and those things that they have done wrong, they should account for police brutality, notwithstanding the rights of police officers also, because they are performing a sacred duty to the state. They also have lives that also should be respected and protected. For me, those parameters, I believe in the principles of democracy. We should all disagree because we are not thinking the same. We are not the same, but those fundamental principles, whether you are Minister Soiree, whether you are head of IGL and Lavalier, whether you are head of campaign for good governance, Mercella Samba, or whether you are Mr. Berete, formerly spokesperson in the former government, we should not go below those fundamental principles. Respect for the rights and views of individuals, freedom of association, the right to protest. Some of the things we do, we don't jump in the streets. My organization do not believe in protest. We do not do protest. We do voice. We believe in talking. That's why when we see the space for speaking out is shrinking, we feel very, very much aggrieved. We believe in letting citizens have a voice to dialogue with their leaders. We believe to create a space like this when we can speak the truth. That is another point. We need to institute patterns of honesty in the country. Insincerity is the bedrock of our politics. People are looking at you. They see this as black and they will tell you it is white right in your face. And they want to force you to believe it is white. It is wrong.
All right.
We are living in a society that is predominantly going to be violent. And when you suppress people, you suppress their views, they are going to find outlets to bring their views to the fore. I want to encourage us all. It sounds as if I'm preaching tonight. I want to encourage us all. Our society is our future. We cannot allow our society to be going down and we keep quiet. We think that it is right. It is not right. We will all be held accountable. Posterity will judge us one day.
Okay. Yes, Andrew. State institutions and the influence.
Definitely. I think Berete is a political scientist on the table. I think what he can agree with me, the kind of politics in Sierra Leone is extractive. And when politics become extractive, it becomes less inclusive. What I mean by extractive politics, when you go into politics because you want to get, not because you want to serve. So, right? Yeah. So that's why, Marcella, when we sit and look and see what aches in my heart is a lack of conversation on as to how we can push Sierra Leone forward. For the past 4 years, lack of conversation. How do we push Sierra Leone forward? I'm not hearing that. So I think, to me, you're talking about, how do we move forward? We need reflection on both sides. We need reflection on the part of SLPP. As Marcella rightly said, what can we do differently? We cannot continue to prescribe the same, solution. We expect to get different results. We've spoken things about lack of inclusivity. All right, we'll be publishing some paper on appointments. So we look at trends in appointments from now, down to independence. So you can see the issue of appointments. Maybe we need a broader conversation on how do we actually deal with the issue of appointments. At the moment, I think as civil society, we should actually be pressurizing political parties. What is going to be the complexion of your cabinet after election? Because if there is a government in power, and then one region is saying, we do not feel part of that government. We are in a country, but we do not feel part of that. We need some conversation. What is going to be the complexion of the state after June next year? And then on the opposition, while we say all of this, we need the opposition to reflect as well. There were clear reasons why the APC was voted out. So we need some reflection and some reassurance that the reasons why you were voted out, we've reflected, we've changed those practices, we can give you better care. So the same, if you're talking about corruption today, is the same corruption yesterday. If we are talking about division today, is the same division yesterday. I think, but if you take the clock back 20 years, a lot of people will say, we keep talking about the Constitution, but it was the same Constitution under Tijankaba, but he ruled differently. So why is it that different leadership styles are relating to the same constitution differently.
So it's a matter of leadership.
So definitely we need reflection. And again, on our part as civil society, we actually need to be in the gears to de-escalate. We cannot continue like this. We cannot continue to escalate, and we cannot continue to always proffer unilateral solution to the problem. The reality is, as long as we have Ukraine ranging on, as long as we have Russia ranging on, as long as we have 70% of young people unemployed, anything can be a spark.
Sure.
The best to safeguard the society is to de-escalate. So when people romanticize this whole thing about protest, that's not how a hungry man understands protest. For a hungry man, how can I go to that shop and loot? So I think we need to stop theorizing and then face brass tacks. I think on the part of the state, when I said the government need to think deep as to what can I do differently, I think the state needs to be broad. And when we talk about broad-minded state, it's right at the level of leadership. And I keep, rehashing this whole, point that Kaba did on his advisory council. It was a big opportunity because when you have an effective advisory council that is at that level, not only technical, but it's driven by policy and results in the state, even cabinet ministers will say, no, hang on a minute, this is an energy bill. How is this going? Because at the end of the day, there will be people who will triangulate that information. So I think moving into the next election, those are the big asks. We will be doing the Citizens Manifesto. We did one the last election. We will be doing the Citizens Manifesto. One of the things we're thinking about this time is not only to think about politicians, but even to look at a manifesto that demands something from citizens. Suppose Samuel will say, in the next 5 years, let's commit ourselves to 3 things as citizens. It must be as basic as we cannot throw dirt on the streets. Anybody with a cage for thief, even if it's my brother, I will not interfere. Because the other day I asked a Supreme Court judge, say, why is justice going wrong? Then he said, ask yourself. Why are all of you influencing judges? So the moment people are on the receiving end of justice, all of us, the moment our family members are in front of the law, we try to influence the process.
Making the calls.
Yeah, we start making. So the question is, and politicians are raised from amongst us, not that they are coming from a different planet. It's any of us today that will become this. So if we do not get a culture shift from below, it will be a monumental waste of time.
But Berete, let me hear you on the issue of institutional reforms and how these democratic institutions, over time, we've always had, people who interact daily with these institutions saying, independent institutions not in a salon, they're all politically influenced. So the executive has this power, this grip over these institutions.
I think I want to start where Lavalier mentioned about a cross-section of politicians seeing politics as extractive, the self-aggrandizement. I think that is a very important point he raised. People should not go into politics to make money. If you want to make money, go do business. But again, the psyche of the average Sierra Leonean is, as a politician, you should have the biggest house. You should drive the biggest vehicle. You should have money. So what will happen? In your neighborhood, everybody will come to you. Me pikin don 60 day, school fees no day. The question is, where are you going to get that money to finance all of those extracurricular expenditures? But again, when it comes to state institutions, I look forward to the CRC. The Constitutional Review Committee, that didn't happen by accident. It was one of the key recommendations in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report that whenever Sierra Leone had the opportunity, let it revisit the 1991 Constitution. Because the Constitution, without saying that it has outlived its usefulness, there are certain areas that needed to be reviewed and updated. And this is where I want to see the state. When I saw a video clip of police officers shooting people, tear gassing people at the APC office. And you see them going to take the bullets, hiding them, and they were captured. When I saw what happened at Pademba Road, the killings in Tombo, McKinney, Tombo, all of this, when we talk about the rule of law, it doesn't mean when you are given a weapon to safeguard the sovereignty of the state, you should use it on citizens. There must be accountability. Because that is the only way we can say, you know what, our country is democratic. And that is why in my preamble, I was very cautious in saying our democracy is fledgling. Why? Because we have all the institutions. You can name the judiciary, you can have the independent police board, you can have all of this. But you can see even military personnel jubilating, drinking. They tell you then why are not for too long then. Then you ask yourself, is that not a way of weaponizing people against the opposition? When people wanted to raise concerns, they were arrested. And then it's bright, the Femi Claudius School. So the question then is, our state institutions, even when it comes to our constitution, which is not perfect, but still, when you have an executive, even if people say, you know what, the way you are suspending the Auditor General is not in conformity with provisions of the Audit Service Act. But yet still, nobody listens. When they say you are establishing a COI without any due reverence to Section 150 of the 1991 Constitution, nobody paid attention. So these are all, how do we make sure if somebody violates our Constitution, or rather apparently violates it, that his actions could be declared ultra vires by a competent court? Are we there yet? What about a situation whereby you can see a sitting president in Kenya who didn't support his vice president? The matter went to court. The judiciary was able to come out very, very boldly to say, you know what, we do recognize that, yes, there were challenges, but you know what, William Ruto is the president.
How do we get the judiciary to come to the point? Because, for example, going back, say when the APC was in power, the very judiciary, I mean, gave the president so much power that the president can even fire his vice president. So how do we then fix that? Because if the president then enjoyed that supreme executive power, it means, hey, wait, whoever is coming is going to enjoy, if not even more than that. So how do we fix it?
So this is where it borders on the integrity of the judiciary. That irrespective of whatever government is in power, you should be able to speak truth to power. Once you do that, if the political class, the political elites were to dictate to you to circumvent justice, and you say, you know what, I will not do this in the interest of this country. And if you are fired, it should be even made difficult for the sitting executive, the president, to even fire you because you don't want to circumvent. But this is where I said we need to build those structures. Until we build those structures, they are there and we believe in them. You can have all those structures, but if there is not an integrity attached to those structures, then they all become just a facade.
Yes, now you are in power. And it appears you're enjoying all of this in the sense that the way Sierra Leoneans think that when a party or a government is in power, that party or that government, I mean, uses all the benefits, I mean, at their disposal. Hey, I want to get opposition arrested. Let me call the IG. Mr. IG, this person needs to be arrested. Hey, I get a case against somebody in that court. Let me call the Chief Justice. So this is what many Sierra Leoneans believe is happening. It's not starting now, but it appears you do not have the power, or not the power, the will to change that, because it comes with so much affluence.
So Samuel, I sit here as a victim of a terrible culture that we have manicured and pedicured over the years. I was given a state land by the former lands minister. I paid all the entitlements. The day I went to see it, somebody had already taken it over and fenced it and all of that. You know, I am supposed to be a very powerful person in government, right? But we have, you know, got a culture where people no longer respect even private property. Law and order has been broken down for the longest time. So it behoves all of us as a country, as citizens, to fix this. We have to press the reset button. And so colleagues have been quite serious about the discourse here. You know, the democratic space has suffered a lethal blow a long time ago. We're trying to fix that. When we should be having conversations, and my colleagues will tell you, Kaka, you know, you don't want discourse. You honestly don't want discourse. You don't want alternative views. Your ways are set in marble, in stone. It is those things that we should exercise from our body politic, number one. Number two, we did say, my friend noted that the same corruption that was there yesterday is the same corruption here. We have been able to pass successive peer-reviewed global indexes. We have 81%, for example, on the MCC scorecard, and that is we're on the progression. So we are dealing with it. We are not there yet, right? We are dealing with it. You know, to lumber all of us, APC, SFP being at the same, I mean, it's pretty unfair to the heavy lifting we are doing as a country. We still think there's room for improvement, yes? You know, when we were in opposition back then, you asking, I'm juggling two questions together, the institutional issues and what we can do differently. We used to have the regular Wednesday press briefings at party headquarters, right? We did not wait for any issues to happen. We just give policy advice every week. We did that. For example, I would be very, very pleased to see the opposition's alternative to free quality education. I'll be very pleased to see their alternative to women's empowerment, equality and empowerment bill that we currently have in Parliament. I'll be really appreciative.
As hilarious as this may sound, una go tiff the strategy.
No, but come on, this is not a secret society. We shared our platform back then.
I mean,
you know, so we want an opposition that begins to tell government, begins to tell citizens that they are ready, they have the ideas and what have you. And I know they have quite great guys there as well. But we have not seen debates like my colleagues have mentioned. You should be holding government on these matters, alternative policy views. We are not seeing that. And that is important for our democracy to graduate from a fledgling democracy to a more sustainable kind of arrangement. So, Mr. Braitley, you are a breath of fresh air. Now that you are back, I think, you know, let us stop this cacao no talk. Let us begin to engage in profitable political discourse. So, on the 23rd of December 2021, His Excellency formally received the recommendations of the Constitutional Review Committee. Remember, billions had been spent on it under the previous administration. It was an 80+ man committee report. Justice Cowan died a very troubled man, right? He said it, he bemoaned that on Radio 98.1, that all of the hard work they had put in, all of the views of Sierra Leoneans had been rejected, most of them, salient ones, by the erstwhile administration. We felt that was too serious to allow go under the radar. So on the 23rd December 2021, His Excellency President Bill officially received the report and responded to some of the key recommendations. Number one, we adopted the recommendation that we should decouple the office of the Attorney General and Minister of Justice, you know, delineate them so that the AG now becomes advisor to government on all legal matters but does not sit in Parliament, in cabinet. So the Minister of Justice sits there. But this is an entrenched clause. So you will need a referendum, and that is what we'll be doing during the second inning. Inshallah, inshallah, when the president switches to power on the first ballot in 2023. The other bit of the recommendations that were adopted was that, you know, we have spoken about the razor edge division in the country's politics. And this was something His Excellency acknowledged while he was opposition leader. That Sierra Leone is a deeply divided country. So the TRC had recommended PR various Sierra Leoneans when they went around seeking opinions, also presented that, they recommended that. So this is something government had accepted to return to the PR so that you get votes proportionate to, you get seats proportionate to the number of votes you pool. which will give, for example, the APC an opportunity to put all of their votes together to get seats in Kailau, in Kenema, probably in my hometown, Pujo, and vice versa. So that fringe parties like Femi's probably might stand a chance to win a seat somewhere. You never know. Yeah. So again, to ensure that we are able to address, too much powers at the hands of the executive or the commission. You determine election times. Yeah, you determine when you inaugurate. It has now been accepted that we will get definite dates for elections and definite timeline for inaugurations. This will make life easy for all parties.
Okay.
Right? Other countries have it. Kenya has that. I think Liberia, the US. This is how modern democracies are built. You don't get stuck in your ways, right? You can't be embarrassed by your past, yet you do not want to dare into the future. We want to dare. We're speaking about the institutions, the effectiveness, the efficacy or otherwise of the institutions. Yes, we have come a long way. We still have a lot of challenges in our institutions, but I think the judiciary has been making substantial progress. In every district now you have sitting magistrates, you have resident magistrates there, they have access to justice. That improves because when we were in school, they used to say to us that justice delayed is justice denied. Some matters used to be on the shelf forever before they could be addressed. So now you have these sitting magistrates in virtually every chiefdom.
There are still some taking forever.
Well, we don't have a perfect system. Don't get me wrong, right? I did say so. I did do that disclaimer. But we have made progress because you always look at the baseline. Where are we coming from? Achebe says if you can't remember where the rain began to beat you, you can't tell where you dried your body. So yes, we have made substantial progress. There's still more work to be done. We will keep doing it. But as Sierra Leoneans, we need to put our hearts to this. This is the only country we will have.
All right.
Yeah. Most of us who are not Muslims.
Unfortunately, we're being dangerously chased by time. And the good thing is, I've been struggling going through the messages to see the ones that I would have loved to read, but unfortunately, it appears none.
Oh, really?
So that helps me tonight. Yeah. But let me start off with you. You all of you on the panel, are considered to be very integral component within the governance structure of Sierra Leone. So now, if we are to profile the informative way forward to getting our democracy consolidated and better, Andrew, what should we do?
Bipartisan approaches to solutions. Where Sierra Leone is different from Rwanda. In Rwanda, clearly you have one leader that masters the politics of the state, that has total control. Here we don't, SLPP and APC, we don't have one party that is in total control. So we started off by talking about consensus building. I think consensus building should be key. We cannot take traders off the streets of Freetown without building consensus between the SLPP and APC. We cannot raise taxes in Freetown without raising, because someone would just milk that problem. So I think bipartisan approaches, I think we have to be deliberate about it. It's the only way out for us. For us as citizens, our expectation of politicians is very high and sometimes very unfair. And that's why, to me, when we talk about the next Citizens Manifesto, we're not only going to demand from politicians, we're going to demand something from ourselves as well.
Okay.
What if we say, I just noticed something down. What if we say, as citizens, for the next 5 years, we are going to say we'll never take bribes from politicians? I know it's difficult. Say, me not go ever beg politician. It's difficult for a Sierra Leonean young man or a Sierra Leonean youth on the street to say, that's not how I perceive a politician. But yet you cry corruption. So it's difficult. So it appears as if we all want our own preferred thief. So when someone is corrupt and that person is from... No, I've not said that. So
quickly, please.
So when someone from your village brings something from the States, Lonse, who wrote the two publics, Peter Eke, he said, you have the civic states and the primordial state. So the civic state is actually what we discuss, governance, NGO. But the primordial state, people don't care in my village about corruption.
Right.
As long as I'm bringing home something. So we actually need to see how we engineer all of this.
All right. Mercella, quickly.
But Andrew, I mean, that this is flawed. The primordial states had checks and balances. I come from a group, a family, a community where they taught me don't take what they did not give to you. I know in other cultures in our society where when you steal in that community, they hang bags on your neck and they dance around with you. We have checks and balances in the primordial state, but that conversation is for another day. It's a thesis that is flawed. It's as if our African traditional societies don't have systems, ethics, and
that conversation is for another day.
It's for another day. Go on with your time.
But you see, what Berete mentioned about our constitution and talked about Kenya, the Kenya example. Kenya was like us. They were like us. The 2011 elections was as violent as ever. But every one of them looked at their society, they looked at the future and said, can we come together and design a constitution, highly consultative? The outcomes of that constitution is what is making Kenya together today. So when they have issues, they run to the Supreme Court. They respect the standards they have set. But how did they get there? It was highly consultative, cross-party. They agreed that this is what we want for our country. We need to note that. We need to fix the constitution. Because there are things that, if we keep doing this over and over again, we get tired and we. People call me, you need to talk about this. But I just spoke about this 2 months ago. There is a video, for example. That video was in 2019. It was a show in 98.1. It keeps resurfacing every time there is an issue. Because that's a foundational statement that I made. But if we still keep doing the same wrong, and we get people righting those wrongs, we need to institute the politics of truth. Let us stop lying. They call it fake news. It is lies. If it's fake, it's chaos.
All right.
So the next point, we said all of this, but we did not mention parliament. And I want us to think
a conversation
carefully.
For another
yes.
day. That is the well where the water meant to make sure democracy is drawn.
Because that is the General Assembly.
Right.
When we fix the Parliament of Sierra Leone and get them to understand. In fact, the Parliament is the group that appoints leaders. The president do the appointment, but sends to Parliament.
Parliament approves, yeah.
Exactly. So they have a role to play in all of this.
Definitely.
We want to see our democracy consolidated.
Right.
And lastly, that's my point. Andrew talks about the Citizens Manifesto. The SLPP would have its manifesto. The APC would have. The 17 political parties would have. Why can't we come together and talk about a national transformation plan where no fighting would happen? Everybody decides in the next 20 years, in the next 25 years, this is the Sierra Leone we want to see. So when Party A comes, they have a bite in that transformation plan and deliver. When Party B comes, they have a bite. So it is not about the program, the project that the last government was doing. When I come, I would overhaul and suspend it and introduce mine, and it becomes inherently conflictual. Let's have a national transformative plan that each and every group would subscribe to, and it becomes a national baby that we all build. That's the Sierra Leone we want to see.
Nationally owned document.
Exactly.
All right, Berete, the party shots to, what path should we take?
The path for me is, how do we promote political, whereby if I have a critical voice, I should not be seen as just a member of the APC or the opposition, but rather as a Sierra Leonean whose rights are also protected in our 1991 Constitution. And also, politics should not be viewed as a question of life or death, because that desperation is wherein some lazy politician will always go to preach tribalism and foment and stoke the embers of tribal bigotry. When that happens, I always remind people to just go and read the literature on what happened in Rwanda. One of the commanders there, Romeo Dallaire, wrote a very powerful book that every politician is encouraged to read, Shaking Hands with the Devil. And there is another very prolific journalist, a guy called Nathan Phillips, who wrote, Go and Tell Them Tomorrow That Our People Will Be Killed. So once you get that literature, even from an academia point of view, and when you come into governance, if you do otherwise, then history will never vindicate you, but rather you are part of the clientelism of the state, whereby you are only in to amass wealth, and what about the other people there, whom we refer to as the hoi polloi class, who are equally important. But most importantly, the critical spaces, the voices of the opposition, if I may call them so, are equally important. And this is where any responsible opposition as well should not only be there to criticize, but rather to do it very constructively, mindful of the fact that, you know what, Sierra Leone comes first.
All right.
To me, that is my last word.
Thank you. Mr. Minister, quickly.
Yes, so I see we're having a convergence around a few issues. These, the indivisibility of Sierra Leone. I mean, people like us can only thrive, you know, in an environment of peace and stability, right? I mean, we grew up in this country, knowing no tribes. We have friends across the divide. You know, we visit families in the north, south, and, you know, so that is the Sierra Leone we should be committed to bequeathing to the next generation. So I like to note on the global happiness thing you mentioned, Sierra Leone is 35th, but you forgot to say this was a cumulative assessment between 2013 to 2021. You know, just so that people don't think it is now.
It's now.
Yeah, it's 2013 to 2021. And interestingly enough, Sierra Leone is ahead of Rwanda, is ahead of Botswana. There are quite specific ingredients they use to do this, but that's a conversation for another. I just needed to get that right. So having said that, quickly, I think it's very important for us Sierra Leoneans to say, to draw a line under many things that have happened in the past. For example, somebody sits somewhere, you know, all powerful. Now you can sack your vice president. When His Excellency received the report of the Constitutional Review Committee on the 23rd December 2021, one of the things contained in that document is that never again shall that happen, right? Nobody, by simply losing party membership, should not, you know, lead you to losing your position either as president or vice president. It's now more rigorous, right? You have to take it to parliament and a lot more things, 2/3 and all of that. Because if we want to get serious as a country, we have to look back and correct those constitutional wrongs. Okay. Yeah? So this is the kind of thing. So as I leave this stadium, I like to assure every Sierra Leonean that His Excellency values the lives of every Sierra Leonean that were lost during August 10 insurrection. All right, thank you very much. We have been giving clear instructions to ensure we give them befitting burials. Thank you. That process is ongoing.
Thank you very much, Mohammed Raman Swari, Minister of Information and Communications, Andrew Lavalier, Executive Director, Institute for Governance Reform, Mercella Samba, Executive Director, Campaign for Good Governance, and Abdullah Bereti, former presidential spokesman. Gentlemen and ladies, it's been a pleasure having all four of you in the studio tonight. Just to your audience, in case you miss a part of this, remember to catch a repeat of it on Thursday, 10 p.m. On AYV television. But a fresh edition comes up next week, same station, same time. Here on your home of all things credible, factual, and all times balanced news. Many thanks to those of you who sent in your messages, but I couldn't go through them. We welcome you to be more constructive and tailor them more to the issues being discussed. My name is Samuel Wise Bangwa. The show has been AYV on Sunday, and up next is our AYV Primetime News. Take care of yourself and have a lovely night.